Well, hello, Nate, and
Hello, Greg. However
hello
many
to
people
you.
are watching us. Yeah. We need some intro music or something so we know to
I
queue
know.
up. No, we got to get John on that or someone. If anyone's out there that wants to write some intro music for us, that would be great. Anyway, welcome once again. We are here for What's This Bird Live. My name is Nate Swick. I'm joined by my ABA colleague, Greg Neise, and we're going to talk birds. We're going to talk bird identification, and we're going to
And
do all that stuff.
as you can hear back there, the mailman is here.
Oh, the mailman's here. Yeah, it's the time.
Yeah,
Ours doesn't
Sammy
come till later in the
Sammy
day.
the dog is guarding us from certain death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
can't
hello
trust
to
those
all of
mailmen.
you. Uh, Hi, Mia.
Hey,
Good
Mia,
to-
we're here.
good to
We're
see you
here,
there.
and we're not surprised. Although social media, with its own little weird ways of doing things, has made things a little tougher for us. But we are here, fighting
Yes.
through all of the social media morass to talk to you guys about birds and birding. For those who are new here, for those who are old friends, we'll talk a little bit about what we do. The ABA, the American Birding Association, maintains a few Facebook groups. One of those is called What's This Bird? It is exactly what it sounds. You can take a photo of a bird that you would like to be identified, post it in that group, and our friendly community of birders, admins, all sorts of people will help you identify that bird. Usually pretty quickly, and then every once in a while we get some interesting birds that are unique to the season or a little bit difficult and are worth talking about, and Greg will grab those from the group and we will talk about them every other week or so on this live program. While we wait for people to arrive, hello to everybody who is here. Hello, Greg. How's
Yes.
birding in Chicagoland these days?
Oh, it's as dull as you might imagine for the first week of February.
It's a rough
There's
time of year.
there's a few interesting things around. The most interesting thing, and this is, we talk occasionally about ship assisted birds, and I think we've talked about that here a couple of times. But 18-wheeler assisted birds
Oh, yeah.
is there's so
That's a little
we have,
less
we have now
kosher.
for the second time in a year or so a great-tailed grackle showing up at a gas station across the road from one of the largest transportation hubs for the likes of Amazon and all of that. And I mean, you could just imagine, because if you ever been to places in Texas like that, they're just all over the parking lots. And just
Yeah.
imagine one of those birds getting trapped inside a trailer and just
I
riding
can
up.
absolutely see a great-tailed grackle, a curious great-tailed grackle, walking up a ramp or flying into the back of a semi truck,
Yep.
curious to see if there's anything in there, and then getting
Yep.
closed up inside. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's happened now twice. And the one before that in the Chicago area was at another transportation
Oh, really?
hub for
That's funny.
UPS and
Yeah.
FedEx.
Yeah, that
So
happened a few years ago.
That's what's interesting here.
That happened a few years ago. Before I lived in North Carolina, where I live now. There was a story about a burrowing owl that was spotted in Charlotte, in the city of Charlotte, like across from a U-Haul rental facility. And
Yeah.
the suspicion was that the bird had like popped into a U-Haul and got carried from the west all the way across, and then dumped off unceremoniously in a Charlotte parking lot. And apparently, it was not doing real well. Like it had some head trauma or whatever, is what happens with these birds sometimes. But yeah, birds move around sometimes in weird
Well, the
places.
Chicago
That's the
the
theory
Chicago
behind
area
the
grackles are doing
three.
great eating French fries outside the Pilot
Yeah.
gas station mini mart.
Um, it reminds me. That's sort of the suspicion of where the A Bear's towhee came from in Minnesota last year. Isn't that correct? That it was a truck assisted bird, but I guess there was no confirmation
That
either way.
is for those of you who aren't aware, there was a pair apparently breeding Aber's towhees in Minnesota, which is such a bizarre.
Yeah, it's
Bizarre
not a bird
record.
that wanders much. Yeah,
It doesn't, but two of them. I mean, it is just totally bizarre.
for sure,
Um,
for sure.
Chris
Hey,
Sloan
before we get
says
started, we've got
Nashville's-
some questions.
Yeah, I was just say Chris Sloan says hi, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
And Chris says that Nashville Zoo used to have a sharp-tailed sparrow that it rescued after it popped out of a UPS truck. So there you go.
Yeah, 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 it happens. And I guess the stories of all the ship assisted birds, like birds getting caught in shipping crates and stuff. There was like what the house swift that was found desiccated in a, shipping container in like British Columbia,
Yeah.
and there was a rennet, a wryneck that was seen in Southern California that was suspected to have um, been, I don't know, carried over on some sort of shipping container. Bahama mockingbirds tend to show up in Florida. I'm just saying that
Well,
correlation, causation, they show up at the hubs for the cruise ships
but in the
somewhat
Caribbean,
regularly.
that's a different, that's also a different scenario. A bird that gets blown out
Mhm.
over the sea can just hop across on oil rigs
Yeah, it's not fun. That's
in the
true. Yeah.
Caribbean. So it's like a bird that doesn't, fly very far, doesn't migrate very much. If it happens to get blown out over the ocean in the
Yeah,
Caribbean,
it
they
just
can
keeps going. Yeah.
just hop across on the oil rigs. But um, Susan Nelson on Facebook says she worked at a wildlife rescue place in Northern California, and they got a Laysan albatross that came in on a ship to the port of Oakland, and yeah, I mean, it happens a lot. We have on the ABA blog, we have an article by Ted Floyd called "Ship Happens." And
Mhm.
there's some amazing photos there of the decks of cargo ships just littered with migrating birds.
Yeah.
And but hey, birds use whatever they can find, and
Well,
if they get
there
blown
are
out over
even
the ocean,
records.
and yeah,
There are even records. I mean, they know the birds are there of penguins, if you can believe it or not,
yeah,
off the west coast in California, British Columbia, Alaska. The suspicion is that they were taken in by fishing boats who just sort
yeah,
of keep them on board as a pet or a mascot and feed them fish as they go across the kind of horse latitudes that have prevented them from getting up there in the first place. But then they end up, imagine, birding off the California coast and seeing a penguin
yeah,
swim
yeah.
by. Quite the experience.
So Len Kopka says hello, and Jeff Jump says hello from Greenbrier Mountain, West Virginia. Says it's very cold there today, and
Very cold.
yeah, we woke up to 2 degrees here in Chicago. It's and I understand that the Southeast is going to experience a few things today. Well,
Yeah.
actually, the weather thing that I heard last night is that Mount Washington may have had its coldest temperature ever, with wind
Oh wow.
chills over 100 minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is like Hoth. That is
That's
like
insane.
science fiction. Phil
um,
Kelly on YouTube notes that there was a desiccated wryneck in Indiana many years ago at a military
yeah,
facility. Yeah, I remember that. That was the one
I
I
do
was trying to
remember
think
that.
of. And yeah, I do. That was about a decade ago or so. Sarah Coffey on YouTube asked, "Where are the red poles?" It's a good question. I
Good
haven't seen any,
question.
but I live in the
I mean,
southeast.
they're an eruptive species, and so it's just timely thing we have on the ABA website. If you go to aba.org,
Mhm.
and we'll be talking about that more in a second here. There is an article by Asher Gorbett all about post-breeding dispersal and eruptive bird happenings, especially this last fall in the West, which was pretty amazing in terms of some
Yeah,
pretty hard to find birds like Pinion Jay.
yeah, Pinion Jay, and we're seeing things. The some of the birds that we're seeing in the east now may be related to that. We've seen some really odd vagrant records, like gray-crowned rosy finch in Nova Scotia. I want to say one of the
Wow.
maritime provinces, and then today there was a brewer's sparrow in
Yep,
New
I saw that.
Brunswick. Early this month, so there's some interesting stuff going on. Those are birds that I definitely think of as nomadic, definitely birds that are sort of they move in response to the environmental conditions quite a bit. Things like brewer
Hmm.
sparrow, cassin sparrow. So in dry years, hot years in the west, they tend to show up more in the east. It seems. Jimbo C says red poles missing in Winnipeg. Well, if they're not in Winnipeg, they're not anywhere. I do remember
That's true.
the Finch network, that when they put out their winter finch report, red poles are one of the species that they thought were not going to erupt. Whereas you might see some eruption of things like evening grosbeak, which we've seen a few evening grosbeaks even down into the southeast and into Texas. And but red poles mostly stayed up north. They like those birches, I think, of the things. I'd have to pull up the
Yes,
Finch
I mean,
network,
here
winter
we
finch
find
report, but
them when they do arrive. We find them in birches, and alders.
Yeah,
Alder
and I think
thickets.
the crops are particularly good this year, which is why they're not making your way down south like some of the other finches are.
Want to give a quick shout out here to Cindy Ann Bowers, who said that they had a Cape May warbler riding their sailboat from the dry Tortugas to Marco Island.
That's cool.
And Kathleen Ward from Staten Island. Joanne in Westchester County, New York says it's -2 and they're cold. Nicole, gonna just run down through these. Nicole from Sacramento is happy for some rain. Hi, Nicole. Suzanne Wagner from Ontario. No, Suzanne Wagner says the Ontario Bird Cam says there's piles of redpolls. So, yeah.
Localized, I guess. Where's the Ontario Bird Cam? I imagine it's up in, what is that park that's Algonquin Park? That's north, up in the north.
I would imagine so.
They have loads of everything every winter. But down in Wisconsin, they are missing.
Yeah. Well, we are ticking close to the quarter hour here. How about if we?
I think we've vamped enough, Greg. Let's talk about some birds. People who are going to be here are here.
Yeah. So before we do,
a
couple things.
Let's
a couple things happening on the website that we'd like to direct your attention to. One is an article about snowy owl viewing ethics, and
always a hot topic.
It's always a hot topic,
or
and
topic.
This one's a slightly, I wouldn't say it's a different approach, because the approach is always give the birds the room they need, but it's a really good discussion.
Don't be a jerk.
And you can tell us about the most recent podcast episode, which is
so this I was really excited to have Peter Harrison on the podcast that was released this past week, talking about his Seabird book, which came out in 2021, probably one of the most comprehensive resources to not just tube noses, but birds in general. He has a very broad definition of what constitutes a seabird, so it's a really great reference for things like gulls and terns and cormorants and all sorts of fun things. But anyway, he is a fascinating individual, wonderful stories about writing the first book and traveling around the world in a Land Rover for 7 years, going into these random ports in various parts of the world and working the ships and watching albatrosses. One of my favorite interviews that I've done in a very long time, and I would definitely encourage people to check that out wherever you find podcasts or at aba.org/podcast.
That's at the top of our homepage, right there, front and center, or aba.org/podcast. I think is the best and most entertaining natural history podcast out there available. So you guys should.
I don't know if it's most entertaining. There's some Bigfoot podcasts in the
that's
Apple
true.
Podcast nature category, which consistently get better download numbers than we do. But I can't. They've got to be entertaining. You can be very entertaining when you just make stuff up.
I was born in California, but moved to Chicago at an early age, and so Bigfoot, it just doesn't come to mind the way that, All right, let's get into the birds.
Moving on. Let's talk birds.
This one comes from Pittsburgh.
Excuse me.
Where there's a lot of happy people. There's a lot of happy people in Pennsylvania right now looking forward to a Super Bowl.
No, that's right. Not in Pittsburgh, though.
No, not well. I mean, just in Pennsylvania in general. But no, I understand. Not in Pittsburgh.
Other side. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we got here? We have a pile of sticks all over. It looks like there's
sumac.
a bird in soft. I agree. I would agree that that's sumac. You can tell those red berry clusters.
Probably what this bird has been living on in the winter.
No doubt. It looks like there's a bird in soft focus right in the middle. Kind of a brownish gray bird, very similar in coloration to the trees around it. But there's some things that kind of stand out. One, it looks like it's got a very long, straight bill. It's got a big old black bib on the front. It looks like it's kind of speckled there on the front. Not too many birds that have that sort of unique pattern, Greg.
No, and then we can also see, I think, just a little hint of red on the back of the head. And those, that big collar, there's very few birds that have a black collar like that, as Nate said. Meadowlarks are one of them, but they're pretty bright yellow underneath. Although in the winter they can lack the yellow, but they're They have very little yellow, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But they're kind of streaky
Killdeer.
And yeah, but they'd still have a long bill like that. But the little patch of red on the back of the head, and depending on your monitor size, it might not be so easy to see. But the bird also has black speckles on a buffy belly, and all of those things
I can
add
see
up.
that.
Yeah, all of those things add up to northern flicker, which is
Northern flicker. Yep.
our
And you can even see the
our
black
ground.
mustache.
Yeah, you
Uh,
can.
Yeah, which would suggest that it is a male yellow-shafted northern flicker. So
Yep,
go even
and in
further, Greg.
Pennsylvania, that's what you would expect.
Yeah, that's what I'd expect. I
Um,
wouldn't expect to see red shafted there, or even
no.
any sort of intermediate sort of flicker which exists in the Great Plains. Yep,
And
great bird to be looking for. I always like to see a flicker. Good bird. What our ground woodpecker, is that what you were
I was
saying?
just gonna say,
Yeah.
around the world, pretty much everywhere there are woodpeckers, there is a
Mhm.
ground
One that
woodpecker.
spins on the ground.
And this
Yep.
is ours. There are a few species in the ABA area. Well, two. Yeah, two.
Two flickers in the ABA area, gilded and northern.
Gilded and northern. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in the ABA area. If you said North American, there's some others, like
Right.
Guatemalan
Well, that's
flickers in
exactly.
there, too.
I was just exactly.
They all sort
So
of look
yes,
the same. They
this
hang
is-
out on the ground.
They
Are
do.
speckled and with a big black necklace bib there area.
So northern flicker here for the first bird.
Unique looking woodpecker.
Yeah. So here we have a borb and a borb feeder.
Looks like a window feeder.
Yeah.
Um,
A pretty good one at that. That's a pretty nice image.
Greg, why does this bird have a very long decurved bill?
Yeah, right. Thankfully,
looking at this on my
this
phone.
picture is clear enough. Thankfully, this picture is clear enough that we can see that it absolutely does not have a long decurved.
Yeah, that is
bill.
the hook of a feeder in the background.
Yes.
This bird is a well, I mean, it's hard to, you can get a sense of the size. This is a pretty small bird. You can look at
Yeah.
the seeds in front of it. Very round, very soft looking, very small, deep based, pink bill, big old
pink
black
bill.
eye. Yeah, gray all over, white belly.
Yeah, and I picked this picture because the color, and as you mentioned, the softness of the tones is kind of not what you would initially expect for this species. And so we'll just cut to the chase because it's got that big black eye looking at us. This is a dark-eyed junco, also
got the
known
dark eye
colloquially
right
as
there.
snowbird, because it shows up in the winter.
My grandparents were snowbirds.
Yeah, but this is this looks to be a first year bird that is transitioning into adult plumage, and it's losing
Yeah.
the brown fringing of the younger plumages.
Yep.
You can see a lot of it on the wing because juncos
that's
you
a
think
good
of as
call.
more graphic. They've got sharp lines and gray and white.
Yep.
And that's kind of different here. And juncos can be all kinds of they can look like all kinds of things like this one does.
So this is fun because we're looking at that wing panel, and you can very clearly see that those feathers are gray, whereas the rest of the body is brown. And as you say, Greg, that is the sign that it is a first year bird. This is this past summer's bird, as opposed to a female, which tends to be sort of all brown all over. So when a bird molts out of its juvenile plumage, which is the first set of feathers that it gets after its down feathers, it molts those wing feathers and its body feathers all at the same time, but it holds those wing feathers all the way for an entire year. So those are like adult plumage wing feathers, where it will also, I think dark-eyed juncos molt twice a year, so it will molt again in the spring into that sort of classic dark gray plumage that we think of when we think of slate-colored dark-eyed junco. So those body feathers are kind of brown, but it's got that kind of wing panel, which is an adult wing panel that we associate with those sort of after first year birds, after hatch year birds. But the fact that those are two different things, they're looking different, that tells you the age of the bird. And an interesting thing is that So it will retain those wing feathers much longer than it will retain its body feathers. So it'll molt its body feathers again come spring. And then it'll kind of be backwards. So those wing feathers will be worn and
Right.
dull, and they will be kind of brownish, whereas the body will be kind of bright gray. And so then you'll be able to, tell the difference between this bird and like other adult looking birds because its wing feathers will be so worn, and it will hold
Right.
them for like an entire year, longer than a year, those first wing feathers. And then once it gets on the regular cycle of molting annually, molding its flight feathers annually, you'll start looking like an adult dark-eyed junco when we think of dark-eyed juncos, whereas the wing feathers and the body feathers are more or less the same color.
Susan Nelson on Facebook chimes in, says she has a bunch of them and she calls them junkies. They love sunflower seed and have no problem digging in the ice and snow. No, as a matter of fact, while I was waiting to get started here and charging my mouse, I was looking out my back, and it's as I said here, it's brutal cold, but the neighbor's garage roof is black, and the sun,
so
it's
it
very
warms up.
bright sun
Yeah.
today, and it's warmed up, and there's actually steam rising off the roof because there's a little layer of warm air, and there's a couple of juncos just sitting there soaking up the sun and keeping their feet
Yeah.
warm on the roof. They're
Yeah,
very,
they form these.
I was to say they're just very well adapted to
Yeah.
living in the cold, and they know
Yeah.
what to do.
Yeah, they form these big old flocks down here when we see them, and I take my kids to school in the morning, and I'm driving through my neighborhood, and frequently I'll flush one of those big flocks that's kind of getting grit from the gutters from the curbs in the morning, and they'll just like fly off, and then you see all the juncos fly off, and you know that it's a junco as opposed to any other of the small birds that might be hanging around because they've got those big old white bordered tails. So when they fly, that tail pattern with black in the center and white on either side is just really obvious and really plain. Yep. And you can always tell a flock of juncos when it's flying away because of that tail pattern.
Absolutely, and the chittering notes they make.
Yeah,
when you stumble upon them, they always start making noise. Okay, so we have a dark-eyed junco here, just in case you've forgotten in all of our.
This is slate colored dark-eyed junco.
And this is the slate
depending on
dark. Boy,
yeah, we can talk about junco subspecies. Let's do it. Let's jump right in.
You know that there is an entire Facebook group dedicated to nothing but juncos. So here we go. All right. To hell with the rest of the program. We're going full on. That's right.
We're
juncos.
just all juncos all the time. Yeah. So in most of the eastern part of North America, the junco that we see is slate colored dark-eyed junco. There are a couple other subspecies that we have. There's a southern Appalachian breeding dark-eyed junco that has a grayish bill that sometimes you'll see in the southeast, as opposed to the pinkish bill of this bird, which is one of the northern breeding subspecies. But every once in a while, when you're in the east, you'll see the birds from the west. There's an Oregon junco, which has like dark black head and like a very, very distinct pattern between the head and the back. That's sort of what you're looking for on those. Very common in the West Coast. And then, between them, there's a bunch of other junco subspecies, Cismontanus and the white-winged junco.
Yeah.
And what's the one that everyone's trying to find? Is it Cismontanus? That's the one that hybrid one.
No, it's the other one. Oh boy.
It's pink-sided and
pink. Yeah, there's pink-sided. Well, pink-sided is the one that we really look for here because they're really distinct and they're cool looking and they're quite rare outside of their normal range. They don't move around a whole lot. I'm going to push on from juncos here as I watch the clock, and so
we shouldn't talk about juncos anymore.
So
a lot of juncos subspecies, a lot of cool
here
stuff.
we have two hawks, one from Arizona and one from Virginia.
Cassiar, that's the one everyone looks for.
Cassiar. That's
no
right.
more junco
Cassiar
talk.
is the
We're done with juncos.
The hybrid from the
Duncos.
Canadian Rockies.
Yeah, we're Duncos. Yeah.
All
right.
So we have two hawks here.
Double hawks.
One from Arizona and one from Virginia, and this is one of the pairs that shows up in What's This Bird most often. There's a small handful of birds, and such as brown-headed cowbird, red-winged blackbird, these two birds, and a couple of others that show up every week. And I saw these two in the feed, and I thought it was a really good comparison. So what are we looking at here, Nate?
So these are both birds. I thought that said Wallops Island, Washington. It's Washington, Virginia. So I was going to say they're both on the West Coast. They're not in the West. So yeah, we have these are accipiters. So when we've got several groups of hawks, we can kind of break them down into two main groups: accipiters and buteos. So accipiters tend to have short wings and long tails, and buteos have long wings and short tails. That's essentially the gist. The buteos are soaring hawks. Accipiters are forest hawks that hunt birds for the most part. And these are accipiters because you can see they've got a very long tail that stretches out well beyond the tips of the wings. Now, we've got three species of accipiter here in the ABA area: northern goshawk, Cooper's hawk, and Sharp-shinned hawk. And they frequently can be very confusing. We're gonna throw out northern goshawk here because neither of these birds are northern goshawk, which is sort of a big and hulking buteoine accipiter. But
yeah,
you want to say something about goshawks?
Northern goshawk. I mean, if you see an adult northern goshawk, there's no question. It's as distinctive as a bald eagle or anything else. An adult bald eagle, big
eye line, big gray bird. Yeah,
young goshawk is confused with Cooper's hawk, but when you get a good look at one, there's really
they're hulking. They're big old birds.
It's you know it when you got a goshawk. So
I mean, I was gonna say here, Greg, because that one's in Tucson, Arizona, that automatically makes it an urban goshawk, does it not?
Oh boy, bringing back some
if
old
you know,
memories.
you know.
Exactly.
So, anyway, so the things we kind of want to look for when we're talking about Cooper's hawk and Sharp-shinned hawk are mostly structural. You want to point out the structures that we're going to focus on here, Greg?
Yeah. So on the left here we see a bird with a kind of a largish head, and a kind of a mean looking stare, and a long tubular body. And it's kind of got some a little bit of heft to it. And on the right, the bird's got a smaller, rounder head, definitely a smaller bill, and it kind of has this little kind of confused parakeet look about its face, and that's that really. I mean, on here with these two birds, really look at the difference in the heads. Because we can't tell a whole lot from the tail. We can't tell a whole lot from much else, but we can see the head shape and the way the head is built. And we can see that while they're very similar, they're really different in structure and form.
For sure. You talk about the head, and I'm gonna throw the shoulders into that as well, like kind of the upper breast, because the Cooper's hawk tends to be kind of tubular, as you say, like columnar. Like a bowling pin almost, whereas the Sharp-shinned hawk is going to be kind of shouldery. It's going to look like that little head is kind of perched, like kind of hunched down, and it's got big shoulders. And just kind of thinking about that, you can sort of tell the difference between the two birds, what we have here, whether one is a Cooper's and one is a Sharp-shinned.
We have a Sharp-shinned hawk on the right, the little confused parakeet, and we have a Cooper's hawk on the left, which is the more tubular, bigger head, kind of meaner expression look. So using all of this, and Chris Sloan, I guess, knows.
He knows.
On Facebook, yes. He knows. So that takes us to our next bird from Deerfield, Illinois.
Interesting.
And
it's facing away from us.
Which actually makes this ID really easy. But again, even in this view, you can see that kind of big-eyed, confused parakeet look.
Yeah, shouldery.
It's really distinctive,
wide in the shoulders. Yep. Skinny little legs. Legs. And I think, like in a Cooper's hawk, I would see the cap. Like Cooper's hawk, an adult Cooper's hawk has a cap, like a black cap right on top of its head.
Sharpie has a hood, like it's got its hood up. And so yes, this is an adult Sharp-shinned hawk from Deerfield, Illinois. And you can also tell that the tail is nice and square cut there, and it's also, looking at the size of that fence, that's a tiny little bird.
It's a little bird. I get the real sense that this is a small one. None of these field marks that we're talking about are ones that you should really rely on 100%. But when you've got a bird like this and you've seen all these field marks, check, little head, confused parrot, small bill, shouldery bill, tiny legs, check, all those things, you can be pretty comfortable. because sometimes small male Coopers can give kind of a small look, and maybe they can even look a little bit shouldery. They can have kind of a smaller bill and maybe even a little bit of a larger eye. The eye looks a little bit larger, so it gives kind of that confused parrot look you talked about. But the shape is going to be different. Legs are going to be a lot bigger and thicker, and it's gonna feel like a different bird.
And thinking back, talking about redpolls as we were not too long ago. Thinking back to one of the really fantastic redpoll invasions we had in the Chicago area, we were staked out by some feeders at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and there was an accipiter that was hunting the feeders. It was brutally cold that morning, and this bird was sitting extremely close to us. It had no problem sitting 10, 15 feet away, almost at eye level, and we had extremely good looks at it, and 4 or 5 very good birders. We're like, what the heck is this? I mean, we finally decided on a male Cooper's hawk.
Those tweeners can be really tough.
But they can be tough. But yeah, Gestalt is the name of the game here with perched accipiters.
Yeah, and as Greg points out, like as you get more experience, you may never get 100% confident on every single accipiter that you see, because some birds you just don't see that well, or you're missing something, or it just doesn't tick the boxes in your head. But you'll get a lot better at picking those birds out to where you're good on a 90+% tack.
But this one,
we have a comment from
Slam Dunk.
Yeah, no doubter, Sharpie there. We have a comment from You Are Enough on YouTube. She has an average of 10 hawks a week at her house because she feeds backyard birds. I don't know which of the hawks do this, but they go inside the bushes and take the birds out of the bushes. That sounds like an accipiter to me. That
sounds like a Cooper's hawk.
Yeah, when you feed the birds, you're feeding all of the birds.
You're feeding all of them.
Yeah.
The cafe is open.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. And this one comes to us from Long Beach, Washington.
Yeah. So when I first saw this photo, I was like, Greg, what time of year was this photo taken? Because it was not. I assumed it was December, fall. And it led me. Yeah, I would imagine so. This is definitely a fall image. Birds in Washington, because these are freshly plumaged young shorebirds, young sandpipers.
Yes, they are. And looking at the bulk of them there. We see nice, clean white underparts, most of them showing something of an eye line, dark legs. The West Coast has a default black-legged peep, and these birds, peep is the colloquial sort of the catch-all name for all the little shorebirds you might see running around on the flats or beaches. The little calidrids, and kind of a grayish head on some of these birds. And if you look really close, you might see a little hint of rufous on the back. But the bills too, the bills are nice and kind of long and overall just very sandpipery looking birds.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you said that. Peeps, that's sort of a birder jargony term for birds in that Calidris genus. Folks, the peep that birders are probably most familiar with is the sanderling. If you live close to the beach, it's the quintessential beach bird, and also least sandpiper, which is a common migrant across the entirety of the continent. But these are neither of those birds, though. You might be inclined to think they're kind of acting like sanderlings, kind of walking around.
They do. They're not as They do at first blush look like sanderlings, but they're not.
For sure. They're not quite as, big, like very bulky. Sanderling is a very bulky shorebird with a big old head and a relatively kind of short baton bill. And these birds definitely do not have that. These birds have a relatively thin bill that kind of droops a little bit at the tip.
In varying degrees, which is a good hint.
Varying degrees. Yeah, absolutely. And but there is one bird that looks a little bit different, Greg. I know we've had issues with that numbering in the past. I'm going to go from right to left, and I'm going to say bird number 3 is different. It has a nice kind of sandy blush across
left
the breast.
to right.
left to right, left to I can't do right. I can't do right. Left to right. Bird number 3 has a sandy blush across the breast where the other birds are relatively clean on the breast. That is a different species of shorebird.
That is a different species of shorebird.
Yeah.
So the ones that we're looking at for the most part here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. Those are 9 western sandpipers, which is the default peep on the beaches and jetties and things of the West Coast. And as we pointed out, the black legs, the snowy white breast, the white eyebrow line, kind of a little grayish head that contrasts a little bit with the brownish back, and the kind of longish drooping bill. If you look at the bird on the far right, actually the 2, because there's one just kind of sticking its head in there, and then the bird immediately to the right of the one now that we're talking about, the next mystery bird. So that's the third from the left. You'll notice that the bills are pretty markedly different in length, and even shape. The ones at the far right have longer, more decurved bills, and the one fourth from the left, but that's, like I said, that's sort of when you get a flock of western sandpipers, you see the variation in their bills, and there is quite a bit. But
it can be pretty dramatic.
This third bird from the left, one thing to look at. So look at all the western sandpipers here, and notice how their wingtips are equal with the tip of the tail. Every single one, all of them across there. And then look at that. Look at that bird in the back, left,
pointy.
And look how the long wings stick out beyond the tail. That's a key field mark for this bird.
Yeah, absolutely. It's long and pointy, so this is a much longer migrant. That's generally the rule of thumb for birds with long wings, travel longer distances. It's got that
although western sandpipers are no
brush.
slouches.
they cross the continent. I mean, they winter over here where I live in North America, in North Carolina. Longer. It's a little bit bigger. It's got longer wings. It's got that sandy breast. Bill looks a little slighter. I'm not sure if that's foreshortening or just my mind telling me what this bird is. But I think that's pretty accurate. That the bill is a little bit smaller.
I think you're right, and it's sort of one of these things where when you know what it is, your brain kind of fills in the gaps.
Right. Fills in the gaps, yeah, for sure.
But the bird appears to have more of a scaly pattern on the back as well. It's kind of buffier.
Exactly.
And all of those things add up to a young Baird's sandpiper.
Baird's sandpiper, yeah, that's one of our very long distance migrant sandpipers. They breed in the tundra. They winter all the way down in the southern South America, Argentina and Chile. So they travel a very long distance. And Baird's sandpiper is this is nice because this is a flock of birds in the fall. Baird's sandpiper, young Baird's sandpiper, those juveniles in their first year have such a very distinctive plumage. Not only that sort of wash across the breast, but that scallop on the back, which you can kind of see here. I don't know if you can see the pattern very well, but you can certainly see that it's different from what these western sandpipers are. But they've got this very distinct scalloping on the back. It's very, very nice looking bird as far as shorebirds go, but it's very distinctive and it stands out at a pretty long distance when you see Baird's sandpiper in the fall, young Baird's sandpiper in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the wing panel of all the western sandpipers in front of it, they're kind of blotchy and and messy, and this bird seems to have just nice sort of banded banded appearance. And the Baird sandpiper along with white-rumped and buff-breasted are our grass peeps, and when you have a habitat like a mud flat with short grass around the edges, you'll find like the western sandpipers going out in the mud and digging deep for stuff in the mud with that long decurved bill, and you'll find the Baird sandpipers with the white rumps and the buff-breasted up in the grass picking through the grass.
Exactly.
It's
interesting to see this bird. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting to see this bird on a beach because that's not a habitat I associate with them. They're somewhat an uncommon fall migrant in where I live in the southeast, and it's usually when you see them, it will be like if we've had a drought and the reservoirs are sort of receding, and if we've had a drought long enough that the reservoir, that the upper mudflats start growing a little bit of grass on it, that's about an inch or an inch and a half in height, and that gets them to stop, gets them to put down. So you can see that it's very kind of an ephemeral habitat. But if it's not there, they'll just overfly us and end up someplace else. We won't see them that fall. But whenever we have a drought in the southeast, that's usually the time to look for things like Bairds and as you say, buff-breasted sandpiper as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just before we move on, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 western sandpipers and a Baird's sandpiper in this picture. Chris Sloan mentions that the almost peachy-looking breast and paler throat always stands out, and yes, that is you can see that quite well there. Elise May is having problem with the Facebook feed. I don't know. Nate, is it possible for you to drop the YouTube link in there if people are, because I don't have that. While you're doing that, I am going to move on to the next bird, one of your favorites.
I thought we said we were done with these.
No, come on. We're not done with these until at least April. So
Oklahoma City. So this is the slatyback gull that's been hanging out in Oklahoma City, right?
Okay, done. All right, let's move on.
For those who don't know, there's a slatyback gull in Oklahoma City right now. First yes. Oklahoma record.
And yeah, for those of you who don't know what a slate, this is not it. There, Nate just dropped, as the ABA account just dropped a YouTube link in there for this program. So if you're having trouble with Facebook, YouTube might give you a better connection. You can just bop over there. And we are monitoring comments and questions there as well. So we got a flock of gulls here. And
flock of seagulls.
Yeah, flock of seagulls.
And
so there's two very obvious sizes. I think right off the bat we can see
big ones and small ones.
The one in the front center is a pretty easy bird to identify in this plumage, especially in this situation. It's smaller than most of the other gray-backed gulls around it, and it has a rather bright greenish yellow bill with a black band on the end. And that of course is signature of ring-billed gull.
Appropriately named ring-billed gull.
Appropriately named. And moving backwards through these birds, you can see that they have similar shades of gray on the back. They're similar size. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 ring-billed gulls in here.
I would agree with that.
Then moving over to the right, there's some bigger birds, and you'll notice how the back, the mantle color is a little bit darker. The tertial crescent is a little bit broader and more noticeable. And they have pink legs instead of the greenish legs that the ring-billed gull has. And those are herring gulls, and all of that adds up to a herring gull. You can't really see their bills very well, and there's various amounts of markings on the head, but all of that adds up to herring gull. I don't see anything here except for possibly the bird in question, which is inset, and that's the bird that the person was interested in. And at first blush, before you look at the blown up shot of it, like, that could be a Thayer's Iceland gull.
Oh yeah.
It could be. At first blush, there's a few things here that are kind of suggestive. We can't really see the wingtip very well. We can't tell if we're seeing. I mean, it looks like we're looking at maybe the underside of the distal, the far wing there.
Yeah, I was wondering what that
tail. But the bird also kind of looks like it has a darkish eye. But again, when you look at the blown up photo, not really so much. The thing that kind of stood out for me here, though, was the bill. And the bill is kind of, it's not all that big, and it's kind of got a little bit of a greenish tint to the base.
All right.
And that is something that usually Iceland gull shows. It's got
There's Iceland.
Well, any Iceland, any flavor of Iceland gull. The base of the bill, up to the nostril is a little bit paler than the tip, and it's got a little more greenish tone in it. But looking at this bird carefully, I'd say this is a herring gull. I think this is a kind of a diminutive, or it's a female possibly with the smaller bill, and the kind of puffier round head too, kind of might make you think it's an Iceland, but I do not think that this is a Thayer's Iceland gull. I think this is a herring gull.
I think of Iceland Thayers as kind of having like a dove-like head, like a smaller head, and the eye looks kind of bigger on it than it does a herring, which is kind of a kind of a big brute of a gull. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. I'm not very good at picking out.
They do, but I'll tell you, if you look, like if you go through eBird, and look at hundreds of photos of adult Thayer's gulls, especially in the east versus the west. In the west, they tend to be darker headed. I think here in the Midwest, yeah, they can be anything from white headed like this to rather dark headed like the darkest herring gull there. And like you said, they usually have a smaller pigeon head, usually have a smaller bill, but it's a tough ID. And again, bring up that word gestalt, where you have to like put all the pieces together to come up with the ID. And I think the thing that also really just kind of puts the final nail in it for herring gull is if that is the tip of the far wing, so the bird's left side that we see there, it would be white, and it would not be black like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes to show that you can always find interesting things in gull flocks this time of year. I mean, I think that's how they found the slaty-back gull in Oklahoma City as well. It's always worthwhile if you get a group of gulls that are kind of sitting nice like this, where you can see their parts pretty well. You've got a nice variety here. Just to spend a little time putting your binoculars or your scope over them and just kind of look for birds that are slightly different, because that is going to be the way that you're going to find stuff. Things like, as Greg says, differences in the coloration of the bill, differences in the width and size of that tertial crescent, which is that white, that big white border on the folded wing, and the dots in the primaries, the black that you see of the birds extending out there. Always something worth looking for in a gull flock, even if you're not a guller. Good to learn that stuff.
Absolutely. Now, if that was a Thayer's gull and it was turned the same way as most of the other birds there, we could see those white spots, the apical spots. Sorry, they would be bigger and more bold, and that it would be kind of 50-50 white and black almost.
So again, what you're saying is the apical spots are not atypical.
Okay, time to move on.
Gotcha. Yes, it is.
So let's go to Florida.
Florida is my
Tarpon Springs.
Well, we've got two different kinds of owls here, Greg.
You see, there's two of them in there. Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, Florida's got four species of regularly occurring owls. I'm not counting things like short-eared and stuff down there. So we're thinking about great horned, barred, eastern screech, and burrowing owl, which is local in some parts of Florida. This bird is in a tree, so it's not a burrowing owl. So it's got we got a red one and a gray one. There's only one owl that's got two different types.
Exactly. I mean, well, at least in Florida.
At least in Florida.
A red and a gray one, and that's eastern screech owl. And you can see the rufous bird on the right, and kind of hidden behind some foliage there, you can make out the gray phase bird on the left. And I seem to remember that the rufous birds tend to be males. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's sticking back here in the back of my head that the rufous birds tend to be males.
I think in the southeast, the rufous birds, the rufous morph is the more common bird. But I mean, there's
here, the gray
we're talking like 60 to 60, 40, 75, 25, that sort of thing. Like there's still both of them around, and you'll see both of them if you see the birds at all. But I think the rufous is a little bit more common. Whereas you go further west, the gray morph tends to predominate.
Yeah. So editing home. Sorry there on Facebook. We got a little bit of spam. We're going to delete
Blocking
that.
ya.
Yeah, goodbye.
Banned.
Bye-bye. Okay. So, yes, we got a couple of eastern screech owls here from
Larry Jordan
Florida.
says burrowing owls will perch in trees. Yeah, they will sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, anything can perch anywhere. But you would see the long legs of a burrowing owl for the most part.
That's true.
They
do have very long legs.
It would never be rufous like this bird on the right.
No, that's exactly right.
So this is another bird. I think we're going to wrap up with all Florida birds here for the last 3 birds. So what do we got?
Well, when I see a brown streaky bird, I immediately think sparrow. So, and for the most part, you'll be right, unless it's a red or blackbird. But things to think about: it's got a big, long body. It's got a relatively short bill that's deep-based and pointed. This bird's got streaks all over it. It's got kind of a little bit beigeur on the sides and on that mustache, and kind of this is a very pale sparrow.
Very pale bird, with kind of bright pink legs.
Bright pink legs, yeah.
And the thing that stands out for me, is that the line over the eye, the supercilium, and the line on the jaw coming down from the bill. Some call it the mustachial stripe, or the malar is technically what it is. Those are basically the same color and tone. So, a lot of our sparrows, like song sparrow, it'll have kind of a buffy malar and a gray supercilium. In Lincoln sparrow, which is what the person who posted this suggested it might be, and that's actually because of how fine the streaks are on this bird on the breast. That's not
a bad inclination. Yeah,
exactly. But a Lincoln sparrow has a very unique kind of dark clayish color. It's a really neatly colored bird. But it also has a very distinct gray supercilium, bright buffy malar, and a buffy band across the chest, and a kind of a bolder eye ring. So it's a very different looking bird.
Yeah, for sure. Shape-wise, it's a little bit different, too, because Lincoln sparrow is one of those Melaspisa sparrows, which tends to be very round in the body with a long tail. Whereas this bird's tail is very clearly has a lanky body and a relatively short tail, which is very unique among sparrows.
Yeah. And I'm just going to go back to the thing that I said in the beginning here, and that is the way that the supercilium and the malar are basically the same color and tone. And that is usually a Savannah sparrow, which is what this bird is. And I can hear you right now, people out there going, wait, Savannah sparrow has yellow in front of the eye. It's like, no, it doesn't always. It does most of the time. But in the winter, not necessarily.
Yeah, and this is a particularly pale Savannah sparrow, and it's led someone in YouTube to rightly consider Laura M. Ipswich sparrow, which is a unique East Coast subspecies of sparrow that breeds in New England and Atlantic Canada, and winters along the southeastern coast. I don't think this is an Ipswich. When I have seen them, they are really gray. Like, they are very pale, but it's less kind of the sandy color that this Savannah sparrow is, and more like kind of all around gray. It's a really neat looking bird.
And
Savannah sparrow is one of those birds
too, don't they?
I think that's right. And Savannah sparrow is one of those birds that has like some 27 named subspecies. Like, it's just some ridiculous number, and it's mostly clinal, which means that it's a gradual change from west to east, whereas paler birds on one end of this spectrum and darker birds on the other end of the spectrum. But Savannah sparrows in particular, and that's why it's important for Greg to note that this bird doesn't have that yellow, because they don't always have the yellow. They can be really, really variable. I mean, there's some really kind of dark, heavily marked Savannah sparrows, and there are some that are on the pale end of the spectrum. They're both Savannah sparrows. They both kind of have that unique Savannah sparrow shape. But yeah, there can be a lot of different flavors of
so hold on to that thought, and we're going to stay in Florida, and we're going to stay with sparrows. And here we have the thing that stands out to me things that stand out to me is the supercilium, the line over the eye, and the malar are basically the same color and tone. And the legs are the bright pink, and the birds, as Nate mentioned, short-tailed. And we'll just cut to the chase here because we're going to discuss this a little bit more. This is another Savannah sparrow in Florida. And
and this is a darker one. Obviously, this is a different. I mean, you wouldn't be entirely wrong to be confused by these two birds if you saw them both together, and you might see them both together. You think that these are two completely different species, but no. Savannah sparrow is an extremely variable sparrow. They mostly do kind of the same thing. You'll find them in kind of short grass, edges of dirt tracks, stuff like that. Dunes. They live sand dunes. Anywhere where there's kind of short grass, you'll find a Savannah sparrow. But yeah, they can look really different, like these two birds.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, if it's the difference in plumage there is it's distinct, it's marked, but really when you look at it closely, it's just the same plumage with different levels of intensity. Basically, the bird on the left is just a washed out version of the one on the right. The bill shape is the same, the leg color is the same, the body shape, the tail length, all of that is the same. And the general pattern and everything is the same. It's just one's dialed up to 11.
One's been left in the oven a bit longer.
Exactly. So we're gonna end here with two Savannah sparrows, both from Florida. And we've got a couple minutes left. So what do we got in the comments here?
I'll have a look. We have a lot of people. It looks like someone found from Facebook to the YouTube and is enjoying the better connection. There you go.
Excellent.
I'm glad you have that. That checkmark, Malar field mark, JK says this on YouTube, on the right reminds of Vesper sparrow as well. Though no other field marks. And Vesper is another one of those kind of unique monotypic genus sparrows that can be found in similar sorts of habitat as Savannah sparrow, and it's a commonly confused species.
It does, and I'm just going to jump back to that for a second here, because if either one of those were a Vesper sparrow, two things would stand out. One, Vesper sparrow has a quite noticeable eye ring, and the supercilium is almost not there. It's very indistinct.
The face just in general is much more plain.
Very plain, and the malar really stands out. And again, the thing with Savannah sparrow is that the malar and the supercilium are essentially the same color and tone, and that's usually, and everything's variable as we see, but that's usually a good indication that you're looking at a Savannah sparrow.
Yeah, and Vesper sparrow also has like a junco, those white outer tail feathers. So when they fly, you can see them. You can see them fly away as well. But you don't always see that. They like to kind of sit tight.
And there's also a structural difference.
A little more shouldery. Yeah,
it's a
rounder
bigger
head,
it's just kind of a bigger bird. It's got a little more bulk to it.
Yeah,
so,
it's funny. We talk about all these things like, oh, it feels different. Now, all these sort of things are sort of ingrained once you've put in the reps. I guess you've seen enough of these birds, you get a sense of what it feels like, and your brain kind of short circuits the step by step identification process. So just look at birds, look at common birds, look at uncommon birds, just look at a lot of birds, and eventually those things will start sorting in your head. I know it feels kind of impossible sometimes if you're a novice birder to look at the field guide and see 1,000 species of birds in there. How am I ever going to tell the difference between them? But practice. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall. Right?
Absolutely. And again, going back to those gulls, when I was, I went through a period when I was really, really looking for a mew gull in Chicago. And the first step to that is to look at all the ring-billed gulls you can. And you become so familiar with ring-billed gulls in all plumages that when short-billed gull shows up, it stands out. It really stands out.
It's like, oh, you may not know exactly what it is, but you'll be like, this is different. This is a different bird. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, that takes us to the hour, Nate, and
We did it. We did it
we
again.
are going to have. We made it.
We made it.
Yeah. So, hey, you guys, if you enjoy what we do here, and want to keep it going and be part of the club, there it is, right there. The ABA, go to aba.org/join and join the Bird Club and help support the ABA podcast. What's This Bird Live? You'll get Birding Magazine, and either digitally and it's, hey, $2.50 a month for a cup of coffee. You can help us keep this stuff going. And we would.
Susan Nelson in Facebook asked a really good question that
Okay.
I'll just hit before we say goodbye.
Go
She
right
says,
ahead.
if Savannah sparrow looks so different, what keeps them the same species? Do they do DNA tests? Yes. And what basically keeps them the same species is that Savannah sparrow is an extremely wide-ranging bird species. It's found coast to coast across North America. You can find it just about everywhere. And when we look at those two differences, they look very different. But it's, I mentioned the term clinal. It's clinal variation, which means that the changes between these populations that look very dark and these look very pale, and these are two extremes. And there are any number of birds between those extremes, and they're all interbreeding, and they're all kind of passing the same genetic information down. They're not like any sort of populations that are separate. Well, there are in Savannah sparrow, but for the most part, there aren't any populations that are all that much different. And then down at the very extremes, like Ipswich, we talked about. Some people have considered that to be its own species after a while. And there's a few in California,
exactly.
Beldings and large billed and things like that. They look extremely different, and they may or may not be different species. But for the most part, the wide-ranging Savannah sparrows are just found all across, and it's just a minor variations all the way across the range. But when you see two from relatively disparate points in that range in one place, then they look very different, like different species.
And that's not unique to Savannah sparrow, song sparrow,
no,
fox
that happens a
sparrow.
lot. Yep.
The sparrows that are wide ranging across the ABA area. Go to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska and look at a fox sparrow, and it'll blow your mind.
They're
or the
so
Priblus.
different.
It does not look like a fox sparrow.
Not at all.
The first time
Not
I
at
saw
all.
one, I was sure it was an Asian vagrant of some kind.
Right. Yeah. We'll be back soon to talk about birds and birding. Keep an eye out if you're interested in keeping up on when we do this. Please sign up for the ABA's newsletter, Flight Calls. You can do that at the ABA website. I am not sure we will be able to do one in 2 weeks, Greg. I'm going to be in Colombia in 2 weeks, so I'll be out of town. But if we won't do it then, it will not be me.
Ted Floyd in here.
Might rope Ted into it. Ted could do it. Yeah. So we'll either do it the week after, or it'll be Ted sitting here instead of me. And Ted is always a good time. But we'll keep you posted. Sign up for the ABA's Flight Calls if you want to know exactly when we're going to be doing this. Otherwise, we'll see you around. We'll see you when we see you. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody who watched on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all the places. We got one more question. Sorry. Angela Trinka asks, is it that the same for genetics of red-tailed hawk and dark-eyed junco variations with regard to subspecies? Yes. Short answer. Yes, pretty much. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we'll see y'all when we see you, and have a good birding to y'all.
Later.